Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Mordy and Glory video. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about the Guard. Oh, shocker, what a surprise. Hang on before you get all clever on me. I want to talk about the Guard in 10th edition and my first impressions of humanity's true finest after using them in a couple of games. You see, for those of you that don't know, I've been doing a little bit of homebrew testing of 10th edition, taking all of the rules that we know so far, everything that's been leaked either by Games Workshop or by other people in the community, and combining it with the various faction focuses and datasheets that have been previewed by Games Workshop. Now, don't worry if you feel like you're missing out. I have actually recorded most of my demo games and I've put them on the channel as battle reports. And I'll make sure that I link to one of the Guard ones at the end of this video. And what's been really fun and interesting about these little games we've been doing in the MG Battle Bunker is it's given us a real insight into 10th edition. Generally how the game is going to play, but also specifically how each faction is going to feel. And that's what I want to do today. Share with you what I've learned about the Guard, how they feel to use in 10th edition, and what are some of the most important changes, both the good, the bad, and the ugly. So without further ado, let's fix bayonets, be ready for blood, and charge right into today's episode. Alright, the first thing I want to do is address the elephant in the room and ask and answer the one simple question that a lot of people are going to have on their minds. Are Guard still good in 10th edition? The answer is yes, but also no. Guard still have good firepower, and we still have loads of abilities that we can use to get the most out of our units, and we feel really good to use on the tabletop with big blocks of infantry, large battle tanks, and endless waves of reinforcements. All of that is fantastic. But I would be lying to you if I said we had the same damage potential as we did in 9th edition. Born Soldiers has been heavily nerfed. You now only get those sweet 6s to hit auto wound if you stay still. And as a result, because 40k by and large is won and lost in the movement phase, those armies which just sit back and gunline are going to lose on points. What ends up happening is Born Soldiers becomes a nice to have. You're running around the battlefield, you're shooting your guns off, you're having a great time, and then occasionally you go, oh, this unit didn't move. I guess that gets some auto wounds. Oh, that was nice. Now, of course, this is based on my few small tester games that I've had, but extrapolating that out and looking at the bigger picture, I can see a pattern that's clearly going to emerge with Guard units. You're going to have those which are going to be dedicated towards taking ground, pushing forward, going for the objectives. And those ones almost don't care about Born Soldiers. If they get to have it, it's a little Brucey bonus. But there will be other units in your army which are going to really feel it. The ones that are going to stay still and be able to do that long range fire support. Things like our artillery and our long range battle tanks will still get to enjoy Born Soldiers, but the rest of your army is going to have to make do without it in reality. And overall, I would say that Born Soldiers is going to be about half as relevant and prevalent in your force in comparison to 9th edition. Being able to take our infantry in 20-man blobs is really good. It gives your infantry forces that sense of weight and mass. The amount of special weapons you can cram into your infantry as well gives them a quite nice damage output. For example, a 20-man squad of Cadian shock troopers with an attached Cadian command squad can actually end up with 8 special weapons. 2 grenade launchers, 2 plasma in the infantry squads themselves, and then the Cadian command squad can bring an extra plasma, an extra grenade launcher, a melter gun, and also a flamer. And that's not even taking into account the various special weapons that you can put on the sergeants. For example, a couple of drum-fed autoguns and maybe a plasma pistol on the officer. And whilst we're on the topic of special weapons, the new grenade launchers and autocannons are brilliant. Grenade launchers going up to strength 4 means that they wound guardsman equivalent on 3s, and the fact that they also get blast, which means for every 5 models in the enemy unit you get +1 hit, means that against a full block of enemy termagants, each grenade launcher is firing D3 plus 6 shots. If you've got a couple of grenade launchers and then an extra one from a command squad in one of your own infantry blobs, that means you're getting 3d3 plus 18 grenade launcher shots. This gives you brilliant horde clearing potential, especially when you start using these things on infantry squads which might have special weapons and who can stay still so that they get born soldiers and take aim. And the reason they can stay still, of course, is because grenade launchers are a 24-inch range weapon and they don't need to get closer, unlike plasma, in order to realize their proper damage output. But you can also seamlessly switch into anti-tank mode thanks to crack grenades. Strength 9, AP -2, D3 damage actually packs quite a punch. And whilst you won't be able to deal with heavy armor, it's more than enough to deal with anything up to medium vehicles such as rhinos, predators, and larger tyrannid bugs. That strength 9 really complements the autocannon as well, which I firmly believe is going to be the go-to heavy weapon for a lot of your infantry squads. It has the rate of fire where it can still sling enough shots downrange to tear chunks out of hordes and regular infantry units, but it's also got that strength and damage to be a threat to vehicles. Sure, it's only AP -1, but if you stack enough shots into a Terminator squad, every single time they roll a 1 or a 2, a whole Terminator gets splattered. Look, I've said this on my battle reports and also on some of my live streams, but one of the biggest things about 10th edition and the most important lessons that people need to learn is you need the right tool for the job. And if you've got a weapon system that can do a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B and is effective at engaging both infantry and vehicles, that is extremely valuable. But it's not just the glow up on certain special weapons that are making the guard infantry feel very nice. The amount of close combat potential you have has significantly increased. One of the big problems I used to find with trying to run combat guard in 9th edition was all the little 10-man squads struggled to coordinate. You see, you could charge 2 or 3 units into an enemy unit, but you'd get to strike with 10 guys, and then your opponent would just go, right, well, I'm going to interrupt and kill the other 20. But when you're charging a big 20, 25-man squad in, they all get to strike first. And so the ability for your opponent to interrupt and just blunt your attack is drastically reduced. In fact, the potential for combat blobs is one of the more interesting things about 10th edition guard. We don't know how exactly it's going to work yet. But if you're able to take, let's say, a squad of 20 Catachans, and they've got some rather tasty close combat rules, and then you're able to attach a command squad to that unit of Catachans, each one of the members of that command squad can take a chainsword, really upping the volume of attacks, and then you also attach Strachan, you're starting to get something which feels both weighty but also punchy. Now, all of this sounds really positive, and it is, and you should be excited and hyped for what Infantry Guard might be able to do. However, it's not all sunshine and roses. There are a couple of quite big problems with the new infantry. Frankly, it all comes down to this one thing. Your infantry are great when they're supported by officers and orders. But when they're not, they're honestly terrible. Without the guiding hand of take aim, without the extra leadership afforded by your officers, your infantry are just a mass of uncoordinated ballistic skill 4+ goobers. And it doesn't matter how many special weapons or heavy weapons you stack in there, if you're missing half of the time, if they just don't connect, you're not actually doing all that much damage at all. The tiny amount of damage my infantry was able to just about scrape together without officer support was shockingly bad. It was noticeable on the battlefield. In one game, I had a full 20-man squad with an officer open up onto a unit of termagants, and they nearly wiped out half of the 30-man blob. I then tried to finish them off with another 20-man squad, this time without officer support, and I barely struggled to kill 4 of them. You might be forgiven for thinking that was a one-off, perhaps I just had some cold dice, but this trend continued over the course of 5 turns in this game. Wherever my infantry had officers, they performed fantastically. Wherever they didn't, they were almost useless. This reliance on orders is way more noticeable in 10th edition than 9th. You see, in 9th, even if you didn't manage to have an order available for an infantry squad, it still had loads of buffs that it could benefit from. Firstly, it had born soldiers all the time. Secondly, more often than not, it would be in range of a senior officer, giving it reroll 1s to hit. Probably a platoon standard as well, giving it reroll 1s. Taking all of these little bits into account, even an unordered infantry squad was able to do alright. But we don't have any of that stuff in 10th edition. Games Workshop has categorically said they want to reduce rerolls in the game, and the majority of characters that we've seen previewed, even some of the really big bad ones, don't have any or many ways of handing out rerolls to their subordinates. And it's this which makes our infantry so reliant on orders and officer support in 10th. And if you're a veteran guard player and you experience things like 5th, 6th and 7th edition, you'll remember that feeling of rolling loads and loads of dice with your infantry and with your guard and not much really coming of it, just chipping off a few wounds here and there, and individual squads weren't able to achieve much on their own at all, and it would often take a full platoon to deal with an opposing enemy unit, even a basic one. And when I'm talking about order support and officers and sounding like a broken record, actually I'm just talking about one thing. To be brutally honest, the only order you need is take aim. It is vital. Making sure your guardsmen aren't hitting on 4s is just so important, because if your guards are hit on 4s, then so much of their firepower just gets pissed into the wind. I know a lot of people were talking about the exciting prospect of being able to use first rank fire, second rank fire to affect plasma. I tried 3-shot plasma. Trust me when I say it looks much better on paper than it does in reality. But there are other serious knock-on effects of this reliance upon orders. Firstly, it makes us extremely vulnerable to battle shock, because if a unit is battle shocked, it can't have an order that turn. Considering that guard leadership is not great, it's a 7+ basic, we better pray to the God Emperor that we have some ways of manipulating it. Commissars need to be able to blow a guy's brains out and auto pass a battle shock test. Or maybe they let you use the Commissar's leadership before and you get to re-roll it. I don't know, but one way or another, a savvy opponent will not wipe out your guardsman squads, he'll just degrade them down to half strength and let them battle shock themselves into uselessness. Furthermore, needing orders to make your infantry good makes the reinforcement stratagem way less useful. When I first saw this thing, I was so hyped. I was having images of send in the next wave, forward. I sent in all of my boys, but they had machine guns, tanks, and what did I have? A sacred duty to resist. All this kind of stuff was going through my head, and I had glorious images of wave after wave of conscripts crashing against the enemy, overwhelming them in a tide of bayonets, balls, and blood. Then I actually used reinforcements, and what happened was I brought a 20-man squad back on the board. It fired off a bunch of stuff and did nothing because it didn't have take aim, and it couldn't receive take aim the turn that it came in because orders are done in the command phase and it comes in as part of strategic reserves, which happens in the movement phase. Taking all of this into account, I think it's possible to extrapolate how guard infantry is going to function, how you're going to want to use it in 10th edition when we start getting to some of those bigger 2,000 point standard size games. With hybrid guard, I think you're going to want 2, maybe 3 at a push depending on points of these blobs. You're going to want to put a command squad in each one, and probably a commissar as well, assuming that it gives you some kind of morale, battle shock, and order passing bonus. That will give you a nice solid core of infantry that you can use to hold objectives, do a little bit of fire support. You'll probably want to go for actual infantry squads with that, so you can have them sit still, benefit from heavy, benefit from take aim, benefit from born soldiers, and have them just doing that long range fire support and just locking down the objectives that are near your side of the board, near your deployment zone. You'll then put the rest of your points into probably some elite infantry and chimeras, ones that come with ballistic skill 3 as basic, that'll be able to move, get out of the chimera, and then start hosing people down and not worry so much if they get order or not that turn. And if you are a pure infantry commander and you're excited to try out the new blob guard, how I think you'll probably end up running them is you'll go for 6 squads of assault infantry. These will probably be your Kriegers, your Katachans, or your Caden shock troops. Those ones that aren't going to be standing still, and they're going to be given the commissars or whoever can boost your leadership and make sure those orders are going off. And they're going to be pushing forward, and really they're just meat that's getting fed into the grind of trying to overwhelm those middle objectives through numbers. You'll then have the other half of your infantry be those fire support infantry squads, and they're the ones that are going to really feel that take aim, and kind of like in the hybrid guard situation, they're the ones that are going to be benefiting from all the different buffs and actually doing the damage in your force. I think in pure infantry guard though, you're going to want to take 3 blobs and just take them as completely sacrificial. Maybe give them flamers so that they might get a chance to do some overwatch. But I think taking 60 infantry, putting no commissars or other officers in there, and just basically being like, look, this is 60 infantry that I know I can string out across the front of my deployment zone. I know that it's going to be able to blunt any kind of turn 1 assault, maybe from Marines and Land Raiders and all that kind of good stuff. And I know that these guys are going to die. And that's okay when these guys die, because it means I'll be able to bring them back using reinforcements, and they can start making up a part of a second or third wave that I use to maybe start threatening some backfield objectives, if not with my damage output, but with that ability to basically put 40 objective control on an enemy objective. We've spoken at length about the Guard infantry, but of course one of the things that makes the Guard great is the amount of armored vehicles we can bring to the battlefield. And so I just want to briefly go over my first thoughts and impressions of Guard armor using the Baneblade as an example. The good news is that the Baneblade felt really fun and powerful to use. The new blast rule really means that the Baneblade cannon is a lot more reliable. You're much less at the mercy of that 3d6 and it getting a bunch of 1s and 2s and your Baneblade cannon just going off like a fart gun. Instead, whenever you start shooting at even something that's just got 5 or 10 models in, it just gives you that little bit of an insurance policy. So Baneblade cannon felt really good. On top of this, the Demolisher cannon really is almost the hidden star of the show, the secret sauce that makes the Baneblade feel so nice, because it also gets d6 plus 3 shots. Now, I think that the Demolisher cannon on the Baneblade will be the same one that we see on the Leman Russ. GW has done a fantastic job of essentially streamlining a lot of the different weapons and bringing them back together. We no longer have 7 different kinds of bolter. We don't have one faction with this kind of las cannon, another faction with that kind of las cannon. Instead, it might be a ballistas las cannon or a cognitive las cannon or just a basic las cannon, but they've all got that same profile. And so I think that's what's going to happen with the Demolish cannon and the Baneblade. That means we can actually start thinking about what Leman Russes are going to do. And I think, if I'm being honest, looking at the Demolisher cannon, comparing it to maybe the battle cannon, I got a strong feeling that having maybe one battle cannon will be okay, but going back to Demolisher cannon spam is probably going to be what a lot of Guard tank commanders end up doing. Another really good thing about Guard armor is generally it's very tough. Something that stood out for me with the Baneblade was that toughness 13. Yes, we have 6 less wounds, but I found that the toughness 13 more than made up for it, because it means that strength 12 weapons, like the aforementioned las cannons, only wound you on 5s. And that is huge. I cannot overstate how massive that is. I had a bunch of Space Marines shooting at my Baneblade. Even with Oath of Moment, they struggled to get the wounds to connect. And even when they did, I still got my 2+ save, and I still have a 5-up and a chance of just blocking all of that incoming damage. Obviously, not all guard tanks are going to be as tough as a Baneblade, but if the Rogal Dawn manages to be toughness 13, because it is the same toughness as a Baneblade right now, that would be bonkers. If the Rogal Dawn is toughness 13, it will be the go-to battle tank for the guard. It will supplant the Rust. It will supersede it, which I know will make a lot of Longbeard guard players a bit sad, but that will just be the reality of the situation. If the Rogal Dawn ends up being toughness 12 and a Leman Russ ends up being toughness 11, it's just going to come down to points costs. But it's not just about how well your vehicles can take a hit, it's about how much damage they can sling back at the enemy as well. With the Baneblade, it brings so much firepower to the table, and a lot of that firepower has become much more reliable thanks to Blast or the randomness just going down a little bit in case Demolisher Cannon, and also the fact that the Heavy Bolters have got Twin Link means they've got some rerolls inbuilt there as well. It can kind of get by with only being Ballistic Skill 4+. It's not great, but the fact that it's slinging so much downrange means that it can kind of avoid the big pitfall of Ballistic Skill 4+, something that troubles so many other guard units. The same I don't think can be said for your main battle tanks. I think if Leman Russes go back to hitting on 4s, and for some reason tank commanders can't tell them to take aim, you are going to find Leman Russes and Rogal Dawns really struggling, maybe to the point where people aren't even fielding them. We've tried Russes hitting on 4s before. Back in 8th edition, GW at one point reduced the cost of your basic Russ, fully loaded out with all the sponsors and stuff you could want, to about 130, 140 points. This was about an 80 to 100 point difference between the standard Russ and the tank commander. And all the tank commander that was bringing to the table, all it was doing extra was the Ballistic Skill 3+. No one was taking the basic Russ. Everyone was still spamming tank commanders because Ballistic Skill 4 is just so bad that it didn't matter how cheap GW made the tanks, people were still willing to pay the premium to get BS3 in their army. But before you all start flogging your Leman Russes and other armored units on eBay, I think that it's almost certain you'll be able to put take aim on your tanks. I think that's going to be one of the orders a tank commander can do. And if that is the case, your Leman Russes are going to get a massive boost in damage, even without Born Soldiers. Because not only will your turret weapons now be getting that sweet BS3, but also all of your sponsons and pintle weapons are going to benefit from it as well. Of course, it will come down to points, but it makes your more punchy sponsons and extra weapons a lot more viable. One of the problems with the Rogal Dawns, multi-melters and melter guns and pulverizer cannons is that they only hit on 4s. And so they're not really worth it. You're better off going for the Daka Dawn and just spraying the enemy down with as much lead as you can. But if you can suddenly start getting Ballistic Skill 3+ on the multi-melters and the pulverizer cannon, if it gets a little bit more reliability as well, maybe GW brings it in line with like a Demolisher cannon, your Dawn is starting to look very tasty. And that translates over to the Russes as well, with things like multi-melter sponsons and whole las cannons. At the end of the day, my little conscripts, this whole thing can be boiled down to one simple fact. The Guard is going to live and die on its ability to access Ballistic Skill 3+. If we can do it, we'll be able to cruise into 10th and we'll be confident. If we can't, there's going to be some dark times ahead. But all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure you smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. If you want to go the extra mile and support the channel whilst also unlocking a whole bunch of perks, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By becoming a supporter, you will gain access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 1,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord, and we've got hobbying, tactics, army lists, and even a pretty spicy meme channel as well. And I just want to take a moment to say a big thank you to all of the latest channel members. Thank you to Somewhat Amusing, Armageddon Slayer, Oradina, Thumbtack22, Mark Barlow, Russell S, Dallas S, Help Me Please, John Marr, Nocturnal Owl, Brandon Frisch, Dagnalls, and Alfarius. Thank you guys for doing your part. I also want to do a shout out to the latest Patreon supporters, so a massive thank you to Elijah J, Simon Dolding, Cyberez, Iron Nerd, Jonathan Jacobson, and Flynn Drake. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the Call of Duty. So a massive thank you to Alan Blunt III, Bon Bon Vert, Mark Panconi, Ross Miller, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Diesel Fox, August Varney, and Absolute Rubbish. Thank you to every single one of you. You guys are incredible. Without you, I wouldn't be able to do Mordian Glory full time. I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching. And of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.